we digress from the discussion of restricted access to information and books, and whether it is Civil War books or the Scarlet Letter or, all of these different things. We've again, it goes back to my conversation that goes back 2 years ago. Are we going backwards? All of a sudden, we're trying to restrict access to information.
You see, you said all of a sudden, and I just told you that no.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so no, it's not that we're going backwards. We recycle, right? Every generation has to learn all these lessons all over again. We learn them imperfectly. And so time is not linear. Progress is not linear. But we don't have electrified houses if we're not progressing.
Right.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
All right, Dr. Phil.
Hey, Dr. Peter.
We may never get off this topic. Could you find Uncle Tom's Cabin in the libraries of the schools in Mississippi?
I don't remember. I don't remember how I found it. First of all, you need to understand that I had read Uncle Tom's Cabin before I was in high school.
Right.
And I was in a segregated school system. There was a list of books, but that book wasn't necessarily outlawed.
Okay.
At the time, because it was exfoliative rather than threatening. And nobody really cared about Langston Hughes was considered an outlier in the mainstream culture until the latter part of his life. And by that time, the civil rights movement was moving pretty well. And all of a sudden, people became concerned because this new literature became out, right? But that was kind of underground literature for a lot of people. It was only the elite academics that even knew of it. There is a wonderful poem that Langston Hughes wrote about a picnic, and he writes it in slave slang, and he describes what they had at this dinner or picnic. And he just did it for fun. But I can imagine that when white culture read it, it just portrayed the happy slave.
A good segue to another discussion, which is really the discussion of books and banned books and books that the Langston Hughes and Du Bois. And the question from Uncle Tom's Cabin came because, again, it was a portrayal of slavery, and our discussions about the education and history books and history that the way it was taught in Mississippi versus history the way it was taught in the Northeast. I mean, we read Langston Hughes in New York as part of our literature classes. And I remember reading many of his poems and becoming interested in what he had to say, more so than Shakespeare, by the way.
Yeah. He was much more colorful in English language, and I didn't mean that as a pun.
No, well, it was easier to understand too. The question came from the concept of how restricted were things, and it was a To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes.
Or, again, another book, Scarlet Letter, Catcher in the Rye, some of the classics that we read in the 70s and the like that are on the restricted book lists now. I mean, it's like, what's going on? So the original question is, what was going on in your world? What was allowed in your libraries versus the more liberal world that I grew up in?
So first of all, let me start out by saying, reminding you again that the control of books in the public school system has always been there. As a matter of fact, but especially in the South. And after the Civil War, Daughters of the American Revolution actually developed a strategy to promote a new narrative of the Civil War. And that narrative wasn't that they were fighting for slavery, they were fighting for state rights.
Right.
And as far as they were concerned, the war wasn't over. They were going to win the peace, essentially, and they were going to do it by never admitting that the war was over, just as Trump didn't want to admit that the election was over. We're not fighting anymore, but the war is still going on. That's the peace. And we're going to win the peace. And we're going to do that by making sure that we extol our patriots. And that's why we have the Confederate heroes in statues and, but again, that's my granddaddy, and my granddaddy was a general, and my granddaddy won this battle and did that. So it's heritage now, not hate, but it's a subtle part of maintaining this narrative. And when I talk about the war, I'm going to talk about it in terms of a political concept rather than a social structure, right? And so this is about developing a totally separate country on the continent. And we don't understand why that was such a bad thing. We did that against Great Britain. We ought to be able to live the way we want to live. You don't want to have slaves, that's fine, but that's not the issue. We have a state right to have slaves we want to. And if we change, we change, there's no, we don't want to get into how these people are treated. We don't want to get into humanitarian issues. We don't even want to get into the fact that our whole economy is based on slavery. Those are not the issues here. The issues that we want to talk about is state rights. So the history books had to be carved and promoted in that narrative. And we had to restrict access to any information that might cause questions of that narrative. And so controlling academic freedom has always been a part of that strategy. And so it was much more, believe it or not, it was much more imperative that they do that in the majority schools rather than, they didn't care much about the segregated schools. First of all, they didn't think we had enough money to buy anybody else's books. So and nobody was interested in counterculture. It's hard enough to learn the Confederate history. But the Civil War is going to take all of 2 pages, and the Civil Rights Movement is going to take a paragraph.
So now, wait a second. Your mom still lives in Jackson.
Yes.
Now, I know you're going to be visiting her soon.
I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be interesting to stop off at the high school that you went to.
Yes, and just go through the library.
Go through the library. Maybe pick up a history book and see how some of these things have changed in the last 90 years since you were in school there.
Well, that would force me to remember what was in the history book when I took history.
Yeah, well, it was on tablets back then.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're all broken up now. So
yes.
so it's all depending on my memory, and that's pretty flawless.
No, it would be interesting just to walk through. First of all, I guarantee you the hallways are going to look a lot narrower now than they did back then.
Yes.
Everything's going to look different, but just to get a feeling for the difference. And I have not been back inside of my high school since I graduated that I can think of, but it would be interesting to go back and see what has changed in the high school that you went to.
Yeah, I should go back to see if my picture is still on the wall.
Well, as captain of the football team, tennis team, excuse me.
No, you know what? No, I'm sure they had to take it down just because there wasn't enough room left. They're gone so long, but
it's like when I went back to Illinois for our reunion recently, and you're trying to find your class composite with all of you on the wall.
Yeah.
Like it's so far down in the hallway that you can't find your class any longer because there's so many classes that have passed.
Yeah. Your picture was in the prominent part of the hall, but that part of the building is no longer the prominent building.
No. I got to give Davis credit because they have computerized a lot of the search from that standpoint.
They've digitized their wall.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. We digress from the discussion of restricted access to information and books, and whether it is Civil War books or the Scarlet Letter, or, all of these different things. We've again, it goes back to my conversation that goes back 2 years ago. Are we going backwards? All of a sudden, we're trying to restrict access to information.
You see, you said all of a sudden, and I just told you that no.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so no, it's not that we're going backwards. We recycle, right? Every generation has to learn all these lessons all over again. We learn them imperfectly. And so time is not linear. Progress is not linear. But we don't have electrified houses if we're not progressing.
Right.
Nobody can doubt that fire is either out of control because of drought or because we want to barbecue something, or that we've used it to take people to the moon. So you can't say we're not progressing. You just can't say that progression is even or linear.
It's ventricular tachycardia.
Okay.
Up and down, up and down, up and down.
It is, yeah. And we are probably better physicists than we are psychologists.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Yeah,
We're better surgeons than we are psychiatrists.
Absolutely, because the brain is so much harder. I mean, is there anything more complex than the human brain?
We're better internists than behaviorists.
Yes.
We're better tradesmen than educators. We're better carpenters than students.
Yes. We are better on the technical side and doing tasks than we are on the thought process side.
Yes. Well, we're better on the technical side than we are on the value side.
Right.
And that's why we invent the atom bomb, and then we say, oh, what are we going to do with this?
Yeah, I mean, when you can write it down and you can do it step by step by step, and it becomes repetitive and rote, a very large population does that and does it well. When we were in Oregon a couple of weeks ago, we stopped at the Tillamook cheese factory and watched people doing the same tasks for hours on end, putting a cheese in a bag, whatever it is, and you perfect that. But values are hard to perfect.
Yes.
And so it's
Absolutely.
easy, the comfort zone, and I talk about this as from a business standpoint, the comfort zone for a veterinarian is surgery or the exam room. The discomfort zone is having a conversation about performance with the staff member. It's marketing. It's the things that are more right-brained than left-brained, because you can't create a checklist. You can't create a task list when you actually have to create the value system and get people to buy in or believe into that value system.
I don't disagree, but it's more basic than that. I mean, Maslow's theory. I mean,
Yes.
the fact that safety is a value, security is a value.
So we're talking about books, and I'm going to mention a book that you probably haven't read. I actually read it and we just went to see the movie, and maybe I shouldn't assume. Where the Crawdads Sing?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Top Oprah book a couple of years ago. Went to see the movie last night with Sharon, yesterday afternoon with Sharon. It talks about discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
but not so much racial discrimination as just being different.
Yes.
This girl who lives by herself out in the swamp and survives on her own, and those in the city shun her because of that, and she becomes taught and becomes quite successful from that standpoint, but she becomes a victim of a crime, or she becomes accused of a crime because it seemed to be the easy target, in my opinion. Now, I will say at the beginning of the book, as I was reading it, my thoughts, and this may sound racist or it just may sound unintelligent, I don't know. In reading the book, I thought the family was Black. I thought the girl living in,
Oh, wow.
because it was in the South and because of the discrimination that was going on. So it was a perception based upon historical information.
That is unconscious bias.
Right. Well, that's why I was going in that direction.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as you get deeper into it and you realize that the family is not and she's not. And what's also interesting is that her closest friends are the Black couple. that provide food for her and gas for the boat and everything else. And so it's just an interesting discussion of discrimination, not based on color, but just based on being different. Just based upon being different.
I'm going to have to go through it now. Thank you
Go.
for adding that to my reading list, but I can't do that until after September.
Okay. Now, are you tensely eating watermelon right now while we're talking?
I am, yes. I was trying to see how long you could hold, how long you could keep a straight face. That's how comfortable I've gotten around these seasons.
Well, and again, it's just these, I think one of the things that we as a population have stopped doing is reading enough. And I think we can learn so much. And Sharon asked me, why did I read the book? And I said, I can't remember who it was that told me to read it. And I'm glad that I did because of the stories that were there and the background that's in it. I'm currently reading a book that goes back a ways, but it talks about the ACC basketball conference and how long it took to integrate college basketball. Going back to the first team that played in the Final Four at Western Kentucky, I believe that they were an all-black team that made the Final Four, and it changed the whole dynamics of college basketball back in the mid-'60s, I believe. So it's just interesting that what we have become is a 144 character, 2-minute, 10-minute TED Talk world. And you miss out by so much that's in books in terms of details that you can't find in 144 characters or 10-minute TED Talks.
I think you said something what you just said is a little deeper than the words you use. I just want to try to bring that out a little bit. First of all, I don't think reading has been reduced. I think we spend as much time reading as we used to. We don't spend as much time reading deeply.
Okay.
Okay. Or for the purpose of self-improvement. And when I say self-improvement, I don't mean learning a new technique or trying to figure out how to put a floor down or lay carpet or something. I mean mental self-improvement in the humanities. Let's make sure we know what area I think we're addressing here, because I envy you for having the time to do deep reading. I have to read transcripts and dossiers and articles related to my profession and articles related to my profession that have been produced by the college's faculty. So I understand, so that I'm aware of what they're doing. And I don't have time for leisurely reading. Now that's my fault. I'm the one who allowed my work to take over my life. And that's something I'm looking forward to. Last night, I was doing email from 7 o'clock until 1 a.m. And my wife was sitting opposite me at the table reading. And that's how we commune. My second oldest granddaughter reads all the time. And when she's alone, she reads. She also plays games with her friends over the internet, but she does do quite a bit of reading. And we encourage them to read leisurely, to find something they like and to read. My wife is very good at that because that's her hobby now. I can't wait to get back to that because I know I still have a lot of internal growth. I have a lot of unraveling to do. You know, we talk about my earlier experiences. I haven't had a chance to reflect on the experiences I've had in my profession, except for these discussions. And this is why I enjoy these conversations, because it gives me an opportunity to reflect on the topics as they relate to my experiences and my perspectives at a time when I was too busy trying to prepare for the future. And we need to have a talk about the past, now, and the future, because I'm beginning to realize that I've missed the now. I haven't been in the present enough. I have been reflecting on the past, and I'm considered a thought leader because an innovator because I'm always planning for the future. But I don't think I've taken enough time to smell the roses.
I'd love to go there. Let's wrap up the reading and we can talk a little bit about the past, now, and the future. But final question on talking about book. What's the first book you want to read when you have a chance to unravel? When you go to Paris, what are you going to bring with you to read?
That's a very good question, because my first instinct was to tell you that I was going to probably take some business related topics because of the project that I have to work on, even after I stepped down as dean. And if I didn't do that, then it would probably be something related to my new venture that I'm considering. And so I may just be hardwired that way. You know, it's hard for me to just totally abandon everything. Now, I may just play computer games.
Well, that's not too bad.
I'm not sure I'm going to read. I have to relearn how to read.
We got 12 hours of airplanes.
Yeah,
Much of
good
which
point.
is sleep.
I have a list of books on my table that I was cycling through,
Right.
and there's so many of them that I know that, and one of them is the Bible.
Okay.
One of them is the Obama book you gave me.
Okay.
And then I have Obama's autobiography that I haven't finished reading. And I also have the Lewis and Clark
Oh,
expedition that I started reading. And then I have a book that I'm writing. And so I will probably actually start work on my book.
well, I'm hoping your book is the past.
It
the
is.
history of from where you were to where you are now. So you can
Yeah.
actually document what you don't remember for the future.
Yeah, it's more of a memoir.
We will coach everybody who's listening to look forward to Phil Nelson's life
Let's
story.
not promote it until I've written it.
It'll be a bestseller right next to Obama's.
Yeah, boy.
Sure.
I also have a list of books. I'm gonna tell you the last books that I read are the business books that I've collected that I've only perused. I want to read that in depth, but I've just perused them and took out the concepts I needed at the time, right? When they were great. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits was transformative for me.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time I enjoyed reading those books, right? So I really can't say that I gave up leisure reading, but as much as I love sci-fi, the last real book that I remember in sci-fi was Foundation by Isaac Asimov.
Ah. You know, that's a series now on Apple TV.
I know. And my biggest critique about it is it takes them so long to do the seasons. I mean, the first season came out 2 years ago, and I'm rewatching it now in preparation for the next season that's supposed to come out in the fall, I think.
So we're going to digress to sci-fi for just a second. I remember going to see Star Wars, the original Star Wars, which was number 4 in the actual chronological. Yeah. Back in 1970.
Was it 77?
78, 77, 78, something like that.
Okay.
It was on a date. I'm not sure I saw a lot of the movie. But I had not really sat through all the Star Wars 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3.
Mm-hmm.
And we started to watch them. So I am, unlike many of our generation, I never got buried into the sci-fi genre.
Well, I was buried before Star Wars came out.
As a matter of fact, Star Trek, you probably were.
No. Star Trek. No, I was buried in literature.
Okay.
I had read Dune.
I
have a library of sci-fi books, and TV was in its infancy. I didn't develop my interest through TV. It wasn't until Star Wars captured me because of the special effects.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a great story around it too, though. It's nothing but a medieval story placed in, or maybe I should say human civilization placed in space, in a larger cosmos, and breaking the laws of physics all the time, as we now know it, which is something we're constantly trying to do. We're trying to marry quantum physics and Newtonian physics all the time.
I'm just having a hard time with the Doppler effect, but go ahead. Physics was not my big thing.
So when Star Wars first came out, when Star Trek first came out, it was novel. I was a dreamer, so I did like the idea of of being able to transport people and, that all this kind of stuff. But Star Wars was a monumental leap in special effects. And then Stargate, for me, was a mind-blowing approach in how you can get from world to world, a dimension-breaking concept that doesn't require spaceships, although they still had spaceships. They had to get their material through. So it's just intriguing to think about where we have to go, and the fact that we're all riding on a great big spaceship right now that one day is going to either get eaten up by the sun or is going to run into another planet as part of when our Milky Way merges with the Andromeda galaxy.
I was going to say the Andromeda strain. Now we're getting into viruses.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Another discussion.
Well, we've been all over the place today.
Yeah, we're places we've never been before.
Yeah.
And if they could only beam us up, Scotty. Let's wrap that idea up and thank Nationwide again for supporting our lunacy and our podcast.
I just hope our viewers had as much fun as I did today.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.